It started as an ordinary Thursday morning, just like any other. The sun was beginning to peek over the rolling hills of my ranch, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling land that I had worked hard to maintain for years. This ranch wasn't just a piece of property to me. It was a symbol of dedication, hard work, and the peaceful life I'd built away from the chaos of the city. Little did I know that calm morning was about to be shattered by an unexpected visitor. I was outside inspecting the fence line when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Turning toward the sound, I saw her, a woman I'd only heard about in neighborhood whispers and dreaded encounters, HOA Karen. She was the epitome of every cliché about homeowners association enforcers, stern, judgmental, and unapologetically strict. The kind of person who loved to wield her little piece of power like a weapon, wielding rules and regulations as if they were laws of the land. And today, she had set her sights on me. Karen stepped out of her car with that familiar look, the one that said she meant business and expected compliance without question. Her posture was rigid, and her sharp eyes scanned my property like a hawk hunting prey. I knew from previous HOA meetings that she didn't exactly appreciate my more relaxed approach to ranch living. To her, my sprawling land wasn't a peaceful sanctuary. It was a place that needed correcting, a canvas where her rulebook needed to be enforced. Before I could say anything, she pulled out a small, official-looking letter and waved it in my face. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises," she said flatly, as if reciting a line from a script she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "The HOA has deemed your ranch out of compliance and you are trespassing." I blinked, caught completely off guard. 1 hour? To leave my own home? The ranch that had been in my family for decades? It felt like an absurd joke, but the cold steel in her voice told me otherwise. My heart pounded as I asked, "On what grounds? What rules have I supposedly broken?" Karen didn't hesitate. "You're violating multiple HOA codes, unauthorized structures, landscaping, and most importantly, failing to comply with previous warnings. You've ignored all notices. This is your final warning." My mind raced. I had received some HOA notices in the past, but none ever mentioned eviction or giving me such a drastic ultimatum. I knew I had to remain calm, but the injustice of it all was infuriating. Was this really about rules? Or was it about Karen's personal vendetta against me? "What if I don't leave in an hour?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. She smiled, but it was more of a smirk. "Then we'll have to escalate the matter and you'll face legal consequences. I suggest you cooperate." As Karen spoke, I noticed a few neighbors peering curiously from their windows, whispering among themselves. The entire neighborhood was about to witness a showdown I hadn't expected to be part of. I was the police chief in this town, a fact Karen had no idea about. That revelation, I knew, would change everything, but for now all she saw was a rancher who, according to her, was out of line. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just about fences or plants anymore. It was about respect, authority, and standing up for what's right. Karen had no idea who she was messing with, but I wasn't ready to reveal that just yet. Instead, I calmly said, "I need some time to review your claims and consult with my team. This isn't something I can resolve in an hour." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's not how it works here. You either comply or face the consequences." And with that, she turned on her heel, heading back to her car like a general who believed she'd already won the battle. As her tires kicked up dust driving away, I stood there, the letter clutched in my hand, and a fire igniting in my chest. 1 hour. That was the clock she'd set. But this wasn't just about a letter or an eviction threat. This was about proving who had the real authority and protecting my home at all costs. Little did Karen know, the police chief wasn't someone you threatened lightly, and this was just the beginning. The clock was ticking. literally and figuratively. After Karen's abrupt departure, I glanced down at the letter she'd shoved into my hands, its words sharp and uncompromising. "You have 1 hour to vacate your property." I felt a strange mix of anger, disbelief, and incredulity. How could an HOA wield such power, essentially forcing me off my own land with such a draconian ultimatum? And why had this situation escalated without any prior conversation? I paced across the wooden porch of my ranch house, the warm morning sun filtering through the trees, but doing little to warm my mood. The ranch was my sanctuary, a place where I could leave behind the stresses of being a police chief in a small town. Yet now I was faced with a surreal ultimatum from an HOA officer who had no idea who she was dealing with. I needed to think clearly. The letter claimed I was out of compliance with multiple HOA rules, but it was vague about which specific infractions warranted such an extreme response. Unauthorized structures, landscaping issues, previous warnings. I had certainly seen some notices in the past, but nothing that remotely suggested eviction or forced removal within an hour. My mind raced as I tried to recall any recent changes or additions I'd made on the property. The new barn had a permit. The fenced grazing area had HOA approval months ago. And sure, the wildflower patch was a bit unconventional, but that was part of what made the ranch feel like home. I glanced around the property, the sprawling fields dotted with grazing horses and patches of wild grass swaying gently in the breeze. This land was alive with memories and hard work, a legacy I wasn't about to abandon on a whim. Still, Karen's ultimatum hung heavy in the air. 1 hour to pack up and leave. The very idea felt absurd, almost surreal. Could she really expect me to abandon my home, my livelihood, my entire way of life on such short notice? The clock on the kitchen wall ticked methodically, reminding me that time was running out. But what exactly was I supposed to do? Where would I go? I was the police chief, responsible for keeping the peace and upholding the law. Surely I had legal grounds to challenge such an outrageous demand. Still, the practicalities loomed large. I couldn't just leave everything behind, and I certainly wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA push me out without a fight. I grabbed my phone and dialed my assistant at the station. "We need to convene immediately," I said. "There's an HOA issue escalating, and it's urgent." As I waited for a response, I began gathering documents, property deeds, permits, HOA correspondence, anything that might support my case. My mind kept flipping between outrage and strategy. I was furious at Karen's heavy-handed approach, but I had to be smart. Losing my temper wouldn't help. Outside, I noticed a few neighbors starting to congregate near the fence, whispering and casting curious glances my way. Word must have spread fast. I wasn't the kind of person to back down easily, and my reputation as police chief only added fuel to the fire. A knock at the door startled me. It was Mrs. Jensen, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the community for decades. She looked concerned but cautious. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "If you need anything, I'm here." I nodded gratefully. The support meant more than she probably realized. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up against an overreach that could affect many others. The minutes slipped by. I made calls to legal counsel and the city attorney, outlining the situation and asking for advice. The consensus was clear. Karen and the HOA had overstepped, but enforcing my rights would require patience and formal legal proceedings, not something that could be resolved in an hour. As the deadline approached, I stood on the porch, staring out over my ranch with a renewed sense of resolve. I wouldn't be intimidated or bullied into leaving. I might have only an hour to respond, but I had a lifetime of experience, authority, and community behind me. Karen had delivered her ultimatum, but she hadn't counted on the police chief standing his ground. The clock might be ticking, But this ranch and I weren't going anywhere. After receiving the HOA's brutal ultimatum, I stood on my porch with the letter in hand, trying to process what had just happened. How had things escalated so quickly? 1 hour to leave my own ranch? The sheer audacity was staggering. I needed answers, and fast. The initial shock gave way to confusion. I had always maintained my property with care and respect for community guidelines. Sure, I'd taken some liberties with my landscaping, wildflowers instead of manicured lawns, but that was part of the ranch's charm. My structures were all permitted, inspected, and in compliance with county regulations. What had suddenly changed? I decided to dig into the HOA's files. After all, the letter referenced multiple violations. I called the HOA's management office and requested copies of all notices and reports related to my property. The receptionist was polite but firm, stating that the HOA board had unanimously decided on this course of action after repeated violations. Repeated violations? I scoured through the emails and letters. There were a few warnings, minor things about fence height, a gate that needed repainting, and a small patch of gravel driveway that supposedly encroached on common property. None of these, to me, warranted an eviction threat. Then it hit me. The HOA wasn't just concerned with the physical state of my property. There was a deeper tension simmering under the surface, one I hadn't fully grasped until now. My role as police chief in this town seemed to have been a sticking point all along. There had been subtle clashes between me and the HOA board at community meetings. I'd enforced local laws when necessary, sometimes stepping on toes. Karen, as it turned out, was the HOA's informal enforcer, keen on pushing her agenda and asserting dominance. I wondered if this eviction ultimatum was less about the property and more about personal power. The HOA, backed by Karen, might be trying to intimidate me, hoping I'd back down from my position and influence. I decided to call Karen directly. If there was any chance to de-escalate, to clarify things, this was it. Her voicemail picked up, and I left a measured message. Karen, this is the police chief. I'd like to discuss the letter you delivered this morning. I'm confident there's been a misunderstanding, and I want to resolve it amicably. Hours passed without a response. Instead, rumors began to swirl around the neighborhood. Some neighbors took Karen's side, seeing the HOA as the legitimate authority. Others whispered their support for me, admiring my restraint and leadership. The uncertainty gnawed at me. Was this a coordinated effort to push me out, or an overzealous HOA simply following its own rules without considering context? That evening, I gathered my family and close friends in the ranch's living room. I laid out the facts, the threats, and the uncertainty. Their concern was palpable, but so was their determination to stand by me. My deputy at the police department offered legal contacts and promised to provide support. We began formulating a strategy to respond to the HOA's claims. But beneath the practical planning was a growing sense of betrayal. How had things between me and the community reached this breaking point? As night fell, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. The ranch, my home, was under siege, not just by rules and regulations, but by a clash of personalities and power. Karen had delivered an ultimatum, but the real question remained. Why was I, the town's police chief, being forced out of my own ranch? And how far would this battle go? The fight was just beginning. The next morning dawned with a thick tension in the air. The hour Karen had given me to vacate the ranch had passed without me moving an inch. But what I hadn't anticipated was just how far this situation would escalate, and how revealing my true identity would change everything. After hours of deliberation with my legal team and my closest advisors, I decided it was time to take a different approach. Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She thought I was just another ranch owner to intimidate and bully, but I was the police chief of this town, the very person charged with enforcing the law and keeping the peace. This revelation, I knew, would change the entire dynamic. I contacted the HOA board and requested an immediate meeting, not with Karen alone, but with the entire board and community members. I wanted to clear the air, lay out the facts, and most importantly, make sure everyone knew who I was. Word spread quickly that the police chief himself would be attending the HOA meeting. Some neighbors were skeptical, others curious, but everyone knew this was going to be a pivotal moment. When the meeting started, the room was thick with murmurs and sideways glances. Karen was already there, seated with her usual stern expression. The HOA board members looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. I took a deep breath, stood up, and addressed the room. "I'm here today not just as a homeowner, but as the police chief of this town," I began, voice steady but commanding. "I've always taken pride in serving this community and ensuring the safety and fairness of our neighborhood. I'm surprised and disappointed that an ultimatum like the one delivered yesterday came without any prior dialogue or attempt at resolution." There was a palpable shift in the room. I could see some faces registering shock, others dawning comprehension. Karen's posture stiffened, but she said nothing. I continued, "I've reviewed the claims against my property and find them largely unfounded or already addressed. More importantly, issuing an eviction threat without proper legal process is not only unjust but potentially unlawful. As police chief, I'm obligated to uphold the law, and I expect the same standard from the HOA. One of the board members finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Chief, we weren't aware of the extent of your role. The HOA was simply following its procedures to maintain community standards." "That's precisely the issue," I replied. "Procedures should not become tools of intimidation. When rules are enforced selectively or harshly, they breed resentment and division." Karen shifted in her seat, finally breaking her silence. "Chief, we were only doing our duty. Your property has consistently been a point of concern." I looked directly at her. "Karen, if there are legitimate concerns, we discuss them openly and respectfully. But issuing ultimatums without dialogue is counterproductive." The meeting turned into a frank and, at times, heated discussion. I emphasized the importance of community cooperation and legal fairness. I explained the protections that homeowners had, including due process before any eviction could be enforced. Slowly, the tone shifted from confrontation to cautious understanding. By the end of the meeting, the HOA agreed to rescind the eviction ultimatum pending a thorough review of the complaints. More importantly, a dialogue was opened, a chance to rebuild trust and cooperation. Afterward, several neighbors approached me, expressing their support and relief. They admitted to feeling uneasy about the way Karen had handled things and were glad the police chief was involved. The revelation of my identity had turned the tide. It wasn't just about authority, it was about respect, transparency, and community. Karen's attempt to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. But the battle was far from over. There were still grievances to settle, rules to clarify, and wounds to heal. And I was ready to face whatever came next with the full weight of my position and my commitment to justice. For now, though, standing in front of the HOA board and neighbors, I felt a surge of hope. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to shine a light on the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Despite the breakthrough at the HOA meeting, tensions simmered just beneath the surface. The uneasy truce was fragile at best, and I could tell Karen wasn't ready to back down. If anything, she seemed more determined to assert her authority, convinced that the rules, and her interpretation of them, were absolute. The very next day, I received an anonymous complaint filed with the city inspector's office. It detailed alleged violations on my property, claims about unpermitted structures, overgrown landscaping, and even environmental hazards. The timing was suspicious, and the style of the complaint mirrored Karen's penchant for hyper-detailing every minor infraction. As police chief, I had a responsibility not only to uphold the law, but to protect citizens from harassment and abuse of power. This felt like a personal vendetta, thinly veiled as official procedure. The HOA had overstepped, and Karen was leading the charge. I scheduled a formal investigation with the city's building and code enforcement departments. While they had every right to inspect properties, I wanted to ensure transparency and fairness. I wasn't going to let Karen's vendetta turn into an unchecked witch hunt. Meanwhile, Karen began circulating new guidelines and memos to the neighborhood, emphasizing stricter enforcement of HOA rules. She even suggested forming a special compliance task force, with herself as chair. This move raised eyebrows among many residents who worried it would give Karen unchecked power. At a neighborhood gathering, the atmosphere was tense. Some neighbors expressed frustration with Karen's heavy-handed approach, while others supported her, believing she was trying to maintain order and property values. The community was clearly divided. I addressed the crowd, trying to calm nerves. "We all want our neighborhood to thrive," I said, "but enforcement must be fair, respectful, and legal. No one should be bullied or threatened." Karen shot me a glare but remained silent. The city inspector's visit to my ranch was thorough but routine. They found no significant violations beyond minor maintenance issues I had already planned to address. The official report cleared me of any major wrongdoing, undermining Karen's claims. Despite this, the HOA board continued to back Karen, perhaps out of loyalty or fear. I sensed that Karen was becoming more reckless, pushing boundaries without regard for legal limits. I called a meeting with the HOA board president, laying out the facts clearly. "The city inspector's report proves that the complaints are unfounded," I said. "Karen's actions are damaging community trust and could expose the HOA to legal liability." The president nodded but admitted, "Karen is passionate and dedicated, but she can be difficult." I suggested bringing in a neutral mediator to help resolve ongoing disputes and prevent escalation. The board reluctantly agreed. Throughout this time, Karen's hostility toward me grew. She tried to undermine my authority by spreading rumors, questioning my decisions, and even encouraging residents to file frivolous complaints. I knew I had to maintain professionalism and avoid retaliation. My job was to uphold the law impartially, even when challenged personally. Outside official channels, I began having quiet conversations with neighbors, building alliances and gathering support. Many were tired of the constant conflict and just wanted peace. One evening, Karen showed up at the police station demanding a meeting. She accused me of abusing my position to intimidate the HOA. I listened calmly and explained the legal boundaries of my role. The conversation was tense but civil. When she left, I realized this was not just a power struggle. It was a clash of personalities, fueled by pride and stubbornness. The law was clear, but enforcing it in the face of Karen's obstinance required patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment. The battle lines were drawn. Karen, armed with HOA rules and personal vendetta, versus me, the police chief, protector of law and order. The community watched and waited, and I knew that the next moves would shape the future of our neighborhood and my ranch. The escalating conflict with Karen and the HOA wasn't something I could handle alone. As police chief, I understood the importance of law and order, but I also knew that when bureaucracy and personal vendettas mix, the best defense is a strong community and solid legal backing. It was time to call for backup, both from my team and the neighbors who wanted peace and fairness. First, I reached out to my trusted deputies and legal advisors. I scheduled a strategy meeting at the police department, laying out the entire situation with the HOA, the threats, the baseless complaints, and Karen's relentless push me off my ranch. Everyone listened intently, and I could see the concern growing. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was an abuse of power by a local organization threatening one of its own citizens and potentially undermining the community's trust. My legal team advised that we document everything meticulously, every interaction with Karen, every complaint filed, every meeting, and every threat. This would build a strong case if it came to court or required official intervention. We also discussed the possibility of involving city officials and even the state HOA regulatory agency. The more oversight we could bring to bear, the better. Next, I turned to the community. If the HOA was going to target me, they might as well face a unified neighborhood. I began organizing informal gatherings at my ranch, barbecues, meetings, and casual get-togethers to open the lines of communication. I wanted to hear directly from neighbors about their experiences with the HOA and whether Karen's aggressive tactics had affected them as well. To my relief, many residents came forward with stories that echoed mine. Complaints about excessive fines, unannounced inspections, and a general feeling of intimidation. Some had simply accepted the HOA's authority as a given, but a growing number were questioning whether the association was acting in the best interests of the community or just a few individuals wielding power unchecked. I also reached out to the local media. Transparency was key. If Karen and the HOA thought they could quietly force me out, they underestimated the power of public accountability. A carefully crafted press release detailed the situation without inflammatory language, emphasizing my commitment to upholding the law and protecting residents' rights. The response was overwhelming. Calls, messages, and emails poured in, many offering support and even legal advice. Some neighbors volunteered to help gather documentation and advocate on behalf of the community. I realized that what had started as a personal battle was evolving into a larger movement for fairness and accountability. One of my deputies suggested creating a neighborhood watch-like group, not for crime prevention but for monitoring HOA activities and ensuring they operated transparently. I loved the idea. Empowering residents to know their rights and stand together would make it harder for abuses of power to go unchecked. Meanwhile, Karen's tone grew increasingly hostile. She sent emails accusing me of misusing my position, demanding I cease my harassment of the HOA. I responded professionally, reinforcing my intention to protect community members and ensure lawful conduct. Behind the scenes, I met with city officials to discuss the legal limits of HOA authority and explore ways to strengthen protections for homeowners. They assured me they were monitoring the situation and appreciated my commitment to due process. At one community meeting, I stood before a room packed with concerned neighbors. "We're not just fighting for my ranch," I told them. "We're fighting for the principle that no one should be bullied or threatened in their own home. Together, we can ensure this neighborhood remains a place of respect and fairness." Applause filled the room. The mood was shifting. From frustration and fear, the community was moving toward empowerment. Karen, sensing her control slipping, doubled down. But now she faced not just the police chief, but a united neighborhood and a growing network of legal and civic support. Calling for backup had been the right move. In numbers, there was strength. In transparency, there was power. And with that power, I was ready to face whatever came next, because this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. Just when I thought the tides were beginning to turn in my favor, Karen and the HOA retaliated with a renewed and intensified campaign. The uneasy balance that had formed after my reveal as police chief and the community's growing support was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Within days of the neighborhood rally and media attention, new letters started arriving. These weren't polite notices or requests. They were official-looking, laden with legal jargon, and full of new, seemingly fabricated violations. Claims about unauthorized modifications, landscape infractions, and non-compliance with community aesthetic standards flooded my mailbox. Some notices even threatened hefty fines and liens against my property if I failed to comply. It was clear Karen and her allies on the HOA board were determined to wear me down, using every bureaucratic tool at their disposal to force me out. But I was no stranger to conflict, nor to strategic responses. I made it clear to my legal team that I wanted to fight these claims aggressively. Every notice would be countered with a thorough review of documentation, permits, and communication logs. I was prepared to take the matter to court if necessary, but I preferred to resolve it without prolonged litigation. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew increasingly toxic. Some neighbors, perhaps afraid of the HOA's power or loyal to Karen, began whispering rumors. They questioned my integrity, my commitment as police chief, and even accused me of abusing my position to retaliate against Karen. Social media posts cropped up, painting me as a tyrant abusing authority. I refused to engage with the baseless attacks, focusing instead on keeping communication channels open with residents who wanted real dialogue. I held more community meetings, where I laid out the facts and answered questions transparently. It was important to maintain trust, even as division deepened. One afternoon, I received a disturbing phone call. A close neighbor confided that Karen had begun personally visiting residents, pressuring them to support the HOA's aggressive stance. Some neighbors reported feeling intimidated, with subtle threats about increased fees or loss of community privileges if they sided with me. This crossed a line. Intimidation had no place in a community built on mutual respect. I documented these reports and forwarded them to the city attorney and law enforcement ethics board. Abuse of HOA power, especially when it bordered on harassment, was a serious matter. I also made a public statement emphasizing that everyone in the neighborhood had a right to live without fear of retaliation or bullying. Karen responded with her own public statements, doubling down on claims that she was merely enforcing community standards and protecting property values. The conflict was rapidly becoming a battle of narratives. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I continued to meet with my deputies and legal team, preparing for possible court proceedings. We reviewed HOA bylaws, state laws governing homeowner associations, and precedent cases. It was clear that Karen and the board had exceeded their authority, and there was a strong case to be made. One of the toughest moments came when Karen filed a formal complaint against me with the Police Oversight Committee, alleging misconduct and abuse of power related to my handling of the HOA conflict. The timing was suspicious and the allegations were unfounded, but it meant I would need to defend my professional reputation in a formal setting. I welcomed the opportunity to clear my name publicly. Transparency had been my strategy all along, and I would continue to stand by my record of integrity and fairness. Despite the mounting pressure, I refused to be intimidated. I reminded myself that leadership wasn't about avoiding conflict, but facing it head-on with courage and principle. As the battle escalated, the lines within the community became clearer. Those who supported lawful and fair governance, and those who were willing to let fear and control dictate their actions. Karen's retaliation had raised the stakes, but it also galvanized the community and strengthened my resolve. No matter what the HOA threw at me, I was ready to stand firm, not just for my ranch, but for the values that made our community strong. The storm that Karen and the HOA had unleashed was no longer just about property lines or neighborhood aesthetics. It had become a full-blown legal battle with deep ramifications for the entire community. The tension wasn't only between me and the HOA anymore. It had seeped into the very fabric of our neighborhood, dividing friends and neighbors and threatening to unravel years of trust. After months of relentless pressure from the HOA, mounting fines, fabricated violation notices, and Karen's personal vendettas, the inevitable happened. The HOA filed a lawsuit seeking to enforce their demands and, in effect, force me off my ranch. The filing was aggressive and filled with exaggerated claims, but it had the weight of the legal system behind it. My legal team and I responded swiftly with a countersuit, asserting that the HOA had violated state laws governing homeowner associations, including harassment and abuse of power. We sought an injunction to prevent the HOA from enforcing any fines or eviction notices until a proper review could be conducted. It was clear we were heading into a protracted and exhausting legal war. As news of the lawsuit spread through the community, lines were drawn. Some neighbors rallied behind me, disturbed by what they saw as the HOA's bullying tactics. Others sided with Karen, either out of loyalty or fear of reprisal. The once close-knit neighborhood was fractured. Community meetings became battlegrounds. Emotions ran high, and conversations often devolved into shouting matches. Some residents accused me of abusing my police chief position to rally support, while others accused Karen and the HOA of authoritarianism. I did my best to stay above the fray, emphasizing that this was a legal matter, not a personal feud. But the weight of the division was palpable. It pained me deeply to see neighbors turning against each other over what should have been simple disagreements resolved through communication and respect. Meanwhile, the legal process moved slowly but inexorably. Depositions, hearings, and motions consumed my time and energy. I found myself juggling the demands of being police chief with the pressures of litigation. My family also felt the strain, worried about how this conflict was affecting me. One particularly difficult moment came when the HOA attempted to subpoena my official police records and internal communications, hoping to find anything that could discredit me. I fought hard to protect my privacy and professional integrity, reminding the court that my role as police chief was separate from this personal property dispute. The court agreed to limit the scope of those requests, a small but important victory. Throughout it all, I remained committed to transparency. I held regular updates with the community, explaining the legal process and encouraging neighbors to reach out with concerns. I wanted to keep the dialogue open, even as the legal battle raged on. In the midst of the turmoil, some neighbors stepped forward with unexpected support. Local businesses offered to host community forums to promote healing and understanding. Civic leaders encouraged dialogue between the HOA and residents to rebuild trust. I took those opportunities seriously. I met with HOA members willing to listen, seeking common ground and peaceful resolution. While Karen remained entrenched in her stance, I knew that change required more than confrontation. It required patience and empathy. As months passed, the legal battle wore on, but it also exposed cracks in the HOA's armor. Other homeowners came forward with their own stories of unfair treatment, adding weight to our case. The courts began to take notice. Judges expressed concern over the HOA's tactics and their impact on the community's cohesion. While the outcome was still uncertain, one thing was clear. This conflict had brought long overdue scrutiny to HOA governance in our town. I stood firm in my belief that fairness and justice would prevail. The fight was no longer just for my ranch, but for every homeowner's right to dignity and respect. The road ahead was long and challenging, but I was ready to navigate it, armed with truth, support, and an unwavering commitment to my community. As the legal battle dragged on and the community remained divided, it became clear that a decisive confrontation was inevitable. The months of tension, lawsuits, and whispered accusations had brought us all to a breaking point. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had escalated into a fight that affected the heart of our neighborhood, and now it was time to face the consequences. The court set a date for the final hearing, a day when both the HOA and I would present our cases before a judge and lay everything on the table. This was the moment to settle the disputes once and for all. Leading up to the hearing, the atmosphere in town was charged with anticipation. Supporters and detractors alike waited to see how the drama would unfold. I could sense the weight of expectations resting on my shoulders, not just as a homeowner or police chief, but as a symbol of justice and fairness. In the days before the hearing, I reviewed every detail with my legal team, preparing statements, gathering evidence, and strategizing responses to possible arguments from the HOA. We had a strong case, evidence of the HOA's overreach, harassment, and procedural missteps. Still, the emotional toll was heavy. I worried about how the strain was affecting my family, my colleagues, and the community. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early at the courthouse. The room filled quickly with neighbors, reporters, and HOA representatives. Karen was there, as stern and unyielding as ever, backed by several board members and their attorney. The judge called the session to order, and the proceedings began. The HOA's attorney opened with a passionate defense, painting the HOA as a necessary guardian of community standards, protecting property values, and enforcing rules for the common good. They argued that my property was in violation of several HOA covenants and that their actions were justified. I listened carefully, waiting for my turn. When it came, I spoke calmly but firmly, emphasizing the importance of fairness, due process, and the rule of law. I detailed the harassment tactics used by Karen and the HOA, presented documentation disproving alleged violations, and highlighted the damage done to community trust. I also spoke directly to the neighbors present. This fight is about more than just my ranch. It's about the principles that bind us as a community: respect, transparency, and justice. The judge listened attentively, asking pointed questions to both sides. Legal arguments were exchanged, evidence examined, and testimonies given. One of the most powerful moments came when several neighbors, many of whom had been reluctant to speak earlier, testified about their own experiences with the HOA, corroborating the patterns of intimidation and unfair treatment. Karen attempted to defend her actions, but her composure faltered under scrutiny. It became clear that her approach, while passionate, lacked the legal foundation to justify such harsh measures. After hours of deliberation, the judge reserved judgment, promising a thorough review before issuing a ruling. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. The battle had been fierce, but the truth was on our side. In the following weeks, the community slowly began to heal. While some divisions remained, many neighbors expressed hope that the conflict had opened the door to better governance and communication. Finally, the judge's decision arrived. The court ruled in our favor, citing numerous procedural errors and abuses of authority by the HOA, and ordering them to cease all enforcement actions against my property. The HOA was also required to revise its policies to ensure fairness and to hold board members accountable. It was a resounding victory, not just for me, but for every resident who had felt powerless under the HOA's heavy hand. Karen resigned from the board shortly afterward, her influence diminished but not forgotten. The fight had tested our community's resilience and forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about power and governance. But it also proved that standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting the odds, can lead to meaningful change. As police chief, ranch owner, and neighbor, I was proud of the role I had played in this chapter of our town's history. The battle was over, but the lessons would endure. The dust had finally settled. The long, exhausting conflict with the HOA, and especially with Karen, was behind me, but its impact lingered. As the community began to breathe again, I found myself reflecting deeply on the lessons this battle had taught me, both as a police chief and as a neighbor, a ranch owner, and a member of a larger community. First and foremost, I learned that power, when unchecked, can quickly turn toxic. The HOA was created to maintain property values and ensure a certain standard of living, but it had devolved into a tool wielded by a small group to enforce their personal agendas. Karen's zeal, while perhaps rooted in a genuine desire for order, became destructive when coupled with a lack of accountability. This experience reminded me of the crucial importance of transparency and fairness in any governance structure. Whether it's a police department, a homeowners association, or a local government, those in positions of authority must always remember they serve the community, not the other way around. At the same time, I realized the power of community solidarity. When I first faced Karen's onslaught, it was easy to feel isolated and targeted. But reaching out, building connections, and rallying neighbors around shared values created a formidable force for justice. Our community became more than just a collection of homes. It became a collective voice standing up against intimidation. The legal battles were grueling, yes, but they underscored the importance of knowing your rights and the power of the legal system to protect citizens from abuse. I encourage anyone facing similar struggles to document everything, seek professional advice, and never underestimate the strength found in persistence. On a personal level, this ordeal tested my resilience and leadership in unexpected ways. Balancing the demands of my job as police chief with the pressure of the legal fight was challenging. My family's support was my anchor. They reminded me daily why I needed to stand firm and fight for what was right. As for Karen, her departure from the HOA board marked an important turning point. While she had driven much of the conflict, it was clear that systemic changes were necessary to prevent future abuses. I worked with the remaining board members and community leaders to implement reforms, clearer guidelines for enforcement, mandatory training for board members on legal limits, and an independent ombudsman to hear resident complaints. These changes were a direct result of the struggle, a silver lining to the chaos. It was a reminder that even the toughest conflicts can lead to positive transformation. I also reflected on the importance of communication. Many of the misunderstandings and conflicts stemmed from poor dialogue and assumptions. Going forward, I committed to fostering more open, respectful conversations within the community, encouraging neighbors to come together and resolve differences before they escalate. Ultimately, this chapter of my life reinforced a fundamental truth. Community is built on respect, trust, and shared responsibility. When those elements are present, even the toughest challenges can be overcome. Looking ahead, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just as a police chief enforcing the law, but as a community member invested in the well-being of our neighborhood. The experience had strengthened my resolve to serve with integrity, empathy, and courage. For anyone reading this story, I hope it serves as a reminder that standing up for your rights is never easy, but it is always worth it. Challenges will come, and there will be moments of doubt, but perseverance, honesty, and support from others can turn even the darkest times into stories of hope and resilience. As for me and my ranch, we continue to thrive. The grass is greener, the fence is sturdy, and the neighbors closer than ever. The scars from the battle remain, but they are marks of survival and strength. The HOA conflict was a trial by fire, but it forged a stronger community and reaffirmed my commitment to justice, both on and off the job. And in the end, that's what truly matters.